My name is Mansoor Siddiqui. I was born here in Philadelphia. I grew up out in the suburbs, and I started programming from an early age when I was about 11. I started with video games just because I wanted to make video games as a kid. That's how I got into it. But more and more it started to show up kind of in education. So I think I was around 7th grade. I made a web page. I started making websites to put homework answers up for my friends because I was bad at sports, and that's how I got them to like me. In high school, we didn't have smartphones yet, but do you guys remember the TI-83s with block Jude and everything? I started making apps to come up with answers for calculus problems for my friends. I was selling them with those wires. You could, transfer them to other calculators. So more and more it started to show up in education as I had learned software development and website development and everything. I was going through college, and I really wanted to figure out what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it. And I kept coming back to the point that I wanted to have some kind of big social impact. Whatever I did, I wanted it to exist beyond me, and I wanted to actually have, improve people's lives. And I think that's naturally where people gravitate towards EdTech. In education technology, we all have a passion and interest in technology, but really we want to have an impact in people's lives and improve what's going on. So with EdinLabs, I kind of started the company with the same vision. We also want to make a lot of money, but that's, I'll touch more on that later. I'll tell you a little bit about what EdinLabs is. We started making a few EdTech tools like math apps and chemistry apps earlier on. We have an advisor here at Penn. Her name is Dr. Bobby Kirshen in the Graduate School of Education, and she's a great advisor. She gives great advice. And we were facing a lot of problems with piloting. If you don't know what piloting is, if you have an education tool, what you have to do is essentially test it in classrooms and gather metrics about the efficacy. Someone else earlier mentioned efficacy. That's huge for EdTech, because if you don't test it in classrooms and gather data to show that your tool actually does what it says it does, then no school district is going to buy your tool and no investor is going to give you any money. If any of you are going to be VCs in the future and you're going to invest in an EdTech company, you're going to be looking for the same metrics from the same kinds of pilots. The biggest problem, really, especially in K through 12, is that there's no central place to find these pilots. So what we did, and what most people do, is they'll just send emails out, they'll cold call, they'll ask around. It's like, hey, I think my cousin's a teacher. Let me ask him if he wants to try my app out in his classroom or if he knows anybody. And this is super ineffective for a lot of reasons. In a lot of industries, you can get away with cold calling and gather some interest and get people to test your product. But in education, if your end users are teachers and administrators, you'll send 30 emails out, you'll get 10 back, 4 will follow up with a call, and 2 of them will try your product. And that's just because teachers are super busy. They have a lot of pressure on them to do a lot of different things. And even though they really want technology and they think technology is great, they don't really know anything beyond that. They don't know where to start looking. They don't know if your product is actually going to make a difference. So it's really tough to get a pilot. And that's the problem we're solving with EdinLabs, which is also short for the EdTech Innovation Labs. The idea is for us to recruit and gather a large active community of teachers in K through 12. So over the US, we recruit a large active user base of teachers who are interested in finding new technology. And then we sell services to EdTech companies so they can be matched with those teachers and run a pilot on our automated platform, collect all of the metrics that they need, and then spit it out in a white sheet. So if you're an EdTech company, on EdinLabs, what you're going to do is just sign up. You pay a short monthly listing fee, and you'll get matched with 20 teachers across the US who have demographics that are most appropriate for the kind of product you're building, and you might show the most impact. Once you're matched with them, they decide to pilot it if they want to. The pilot runs, and we collect all of the data and analyze it and give it back to you and the teacher. What's interesting about efficacy, which someone else mentioned earlier, there's a big push for efficacy in the industry. Efficacy basically means how effective is this product actually in doing the thing that it says it does. But efficacy trials are like 6 months to 2 years long, which if you're a startup, that's pretty much your entire runway. You do one efficacy trial, maybe it doesn't prove much about your product, and then your company shuts down. And this has happened a lot in EdTech. You'll see a lot of really cool, interesting products that just never get to the point that they've shown as much validation and data as they need to make a lot of sales. There's also the idea of impact. Now, again, if there's anyone here who's interested in becoming a VC, a lot of venture capital firms for EdTech these days are kind of splitting their focus. Usually you'll invest in a company and your ROI is just based on financials. But in EdTech, they've kind of realized that you're not going to make a tremendous amount of money right away in most cases, so they split it 50-50. They say, we want to see 50% of our return financially, but we also want to measure the impact of your product. In the case of something like SmartTrack, where they want to level the playing field, I think that's one thing we all want to do is allow students in low income and minority school districts to be able to achieve as well as their peers. They should be allowed to do that. That should be just a thing that exists in the world. But it doesn't yet. So a lot of people want to do that, proving the impact of your product to say, hey, we actually do that, that's a more challenging thing to do. And that is what we do at EdinLabs. Good. Yeah, I would agree. If you want to do EdTech, if you're considering EdTech, do it now. Absolutely do it. If you're just looking at it as a learning experience, you're not going to learn more from any other industry because this is going to be the hardest to find success in. But we're at a point culturally, which I feel like is a great point for EdTech, where everyone in education wants technology in their classroom. They want to use technology to improve learning. Haven't quite figured out what the formula to do that really well on a large enough scale is yet, but you can get in, you can swoop in and be the person that figures that out. You will make a lot of money as a result. To touch on what Daryl said too, in terms of finding out what you actually want to do in EdTech, one of the approaches I learned at Drexel from a few of my mentors and teachers, in terms of customer validation, is to just never tell anybody about your idea. It's kind of user experience research in a way that you're just asking people, if you're asking teachers or students, talk to them and just say, hey, what is your life like? What is your day-to-day experience like? And try to find their pain points naturally. Don't ever say, this is my idea, what do you think about it? Because they're just going to say, oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, no, that's great. I like it, I think it's a good idea. And then you go back to them in 6 months having built it, and they're going to say, oh, I don't have any money to pay for it, but I thought it was cool. Whereas if you just try to find their pain points more naturally, you'll have a much better chance of actually solving a problem that they're willing to tell their administrator about and say, hey, we should buy this software because it's actually solving a real problem. He brought up a point that I find really interesting is the level of people that are actually in robotics and programming classes now is crazy. Yeah. And the way the future generation is going to handle and deal with technology is going to be insane. So like 4 years ago, after my freshman year, I went back to my high school. They needed my help because they got a grant from Boeing and they wanted to set up iPads for every student. So they got K through 12, every student has an iPad. They didn't know what to do with them once they got them, but they knew they had the money to buy them. So my job was to set up the iPads, and I was like, okay, great, what software are you going to use? And they were like, we have no idea. And I was like, what's your plan to train the teachers? And they're like, also, just going to wing it. So I thought it would be a pretty huge disaster. And I think what you see a lot of times is because people are just warming up to technology, is they don't know what's out there yet, but they want to get hardware in their classroom. I was eventually fired from that job because I didn't like it very much. But the point is, I went back recently to talk to them about EdinLabs, and whereas when I was at school there was a robotics club with about 6 kids. They were running like 3 sections of classes, like 40 kids each. They were all programming robots to like do, have you seen those Lego robots that go around and pick stuff up and move them around? And this was like every type of kid. So technology access and ability and programming, these things are not going to be limited to just the nerdy tech kid anymore. Rather, pretty much every kid is going to have some programming or technology experience. And that we'll see as, I think to answer the original question, there's a limitless amount of technology out there that teachers don't know about, but if that's the pace that they're moving, then they're going to find out about it pretty soon. So I agree that it's a good play, but it's one that inherently I don't like. Companies like McGraw-Hill and Pearson who have this textbook monopoly, they're the ones who create a lot of the tools, online tools you use in your classes in college, which are just not really that innovative. They're not really that good. And because they have these, 100-year-long relationships and they own the space, they get to push out these really non-innovative stuff. And then we, small EdTech companies, want their distribution, so we partner with them or they buy us and then eventually die because we're absorbed into a culture of not really anything that innovative. So I would like to see a point where we don't have to rely on big companies like that for distribution. I think that'd be better for the industry. It'd be better for the technology that's actually coming out of it because it would actually be more innovative. But business-wise, it would make more sense at the time.